Hi, everybody. This is an extremely informal lecture 10, but I did not actually get anyone showing up to office hours live, and that's okay. I was going to do a review of the lab, and there is already a version of that that constitutes the second half of lecture 9. So I'm just going to do a quick slideshow of some of my Antarctica photos so that you can see them out of the context of the class. And in the class, I use them to supplement ideas and provide reinforcement. I decided to just do a slideshow of them on my own. So this is a panorama of actually one of the huts of the explorers, Robert Falcon Scott himself, that is still preserved from his stay here, and it is actually within walking distance of McMurdo Base. I took a lot of panoramas in Antarctica, I think partially just because the sunlight was so fascinating, because the light does look different. It is more spread out and it looks more dilute, and it makes for some interesting scenery. And another panorama where you can see a cross that was later built in memory of Robert Falcon Scott, as well as the bay at McMurdo Base. And you've probably seen this in some of the pictures before. An ice pond near McMurdo. And going from McMurdo itself, I'm very happy that I got as many aerial pictures as I did during my stay in Antarctica. I got to go in a helicopter a fair bit. And so, for example, I have this picture of an iceberg trapped within sea ice. And then this wonderful view of a view that gives you a sense that the ice sheets are sort of flowing from the land itself. I was near the dry valleys, but still the ice made of the Ross ice shelf still was covering the ocean in the area. And that ice shelf, as we'll learn next week, is actually flowing from the glaciers in the area. Got some nice pictures where you can see that's one of the dry valleys that we would soon take a turn and fly up. You can see that there's some frozen lakes, but there's no glaciers in there. And this hopefully gives you a sense of just how much of a wind tunnel they are. They're kept ice-free by the fact that the katabatic winds, which are already quite intense, get channeled into here and blow snow away before it can really accumulate. Another shot of that. And then that is us entering the valley, and you can actually see part of the helicopter below. I kind of almost like having that in there because it just gives you a sense of what I'm getting this picture from. And you can see that surrounding the dry valleys, you have glaciers. The glaciers are sort of flowing around the dry valleys, and the vast majority of Antarctica is still covered in ice. So this was my first view of our first campsite, Lake Vanda, which you can see is up here, and it's in the upper or higher part of the Right Valley, one of the dry valleys. I took this picture because this is actually a really nice exposure of some granite crisscrossed by the Lamprofure dikes that I was studying. So we would actually hike back here we'd actually hike back over this bit of granite from our campsite way over here, and that's several miles. So a bit of an intense trek over here, especially then coming back with all the rocks on our back. But I'm glad I got an aerial view of it because it would later be somewhere where I did field work. Approaching Lake Vanda, and you can see even more of the black rocks, the Lamprofures that I was studying, and Lake Vanda is frozen. It's like Lake Untersee, which I briefly referenced when talking about extremophiles in Antarctica, how those have the stromatolites there, and there aren't any stromatolites known from Lake Vanda, but you do have a number of lakes in Antarctica where there is some liquid water, but you have a thick surface of ice covering the lake pretty much year-round, and Lake Vanda is one of those. There's actually an old New Zealand research station built there, basically a shelter and weather station. And so we had our own tents for this first stop, but we used the shelter as a cooking place and shelter a fair bit. And these are my three fieldmates, Robert, Dr. John Cottle, and Damien. Actually, they all have PhDs now, except for me. But this is them enjoying a nice hot drink and some snacks after a hard first day of work. And you can see the shelter much more, you can see the shelter tiny here. I'm standing quite a bit of ways from where the helicopter is dropping a bundle. You can't see the string, but the helicopter has a string attached to one of the tents, the big tent, and then it's attached to another string that has a bundle of some of our heavier gear, like the radios and some of our packages of supplies. Some of the stuff did go inside the helicopters also, but the helicopters are designed to be able to carry a payload, and the helicopter pilots and techs were quite good at running all of this without anything breaking. And there is Damien getting low to avoid the wind from the helicopter and also getting some pictures. So I spent about a couple of weeks here in Lake Vanda. It is a desolate place. You can see it's a lot of rock, very little life. Lots of rocks is good. Since there's no soil, you get really good exposures of these little thin rocks. And when an igneous rock cuts across another rock, like when it's a really thin band of magma, it's referred to as a dike. So these Lamprofere dikes were largely what I was sampling to study their chemistry back in Santa Barbara. Here's a slightly clearer view of one. They are the youngest igneous rocks associated with a subduction and mountain building episode that I briefly talked about in class. And we were looking to see if their chemistry said anything about how the end of a subduction period occurs. For the most part, we were walking across granites that were from earlier in the mountain building episode, and that's largely what's making up these mountains here. This was up on one of our day trips when we went up on Mount Loki, yes, named very much like the Norse god. And I really like the way the light is shining on the ice here. That is our little survival kit. The helicopter landed on this little ice pond, and that little survival kit was left behind so that in case the helicopter didn't come back, we would have a little bit of food and water for the night. Happily, nothing of the sort ever happened. But yeah, it is required that you have that if you're dropping researchers off for any period of time in Antarctica, you leave them with a survival kit in case the helicopter can't pick you back up, because we were away from camp for this particular bit. You can see how it's very much just all rocks and ice. You can see actually there's a lot of rocks on the glacier itself, and I'll come back to that, how a lot of rocks are carried on the surface of glaciers as ice rafted debris, and that's one form of glacial transportation. Damien striking a pose here. And some of the rocks we were looking at, aside from the Lamproferes, these are metamorphic rocks, and these are also metamorphic rocks. They're all red and green, and those are from oxidation as well as from epidode and other green minerals. You can see there's this little band of what we think were calc-silicate rocks, which is something that happens when magma comes into contact with limestone, which is a sedimentary rock. And there absolutely would have been limestone here from periods when this was covered by warm, shallow water. Another panorama here. I really enjoyed getting the panoramas there because of the light. More metamorphic rocks and Damien posing and getting some measurements. And more ice and rock. And this is actually a faraway picture of a field site. We climbed up here. This is all scree, which is just rock fragments, and that is very miserable and unpleasant to climb up. I was very happy to only have to do this once, and I didn't honestly make it up nearly as far as the other folks did, just because you're sinking into the rocks. That was happily one of the few days I'd really consider miserable. Most of the time, I perfectly enjoyed it, but sinking into rocks as you're climbing up a hill is really unpleasant. You can see how the Lamproferes are cutting across the rock here. This is one I took from the slopes. That is a faraway shot of Mount Loki, and you can see that it's crisscrossed with dikes as well. This is the valley floor down here. We actually ended up on the valley floor at one point collecting samples because the helicopter had problems landing. Namely, the helicopter's blades torqued too much, and even though the helicopter was flying fine, it was required that they land and have a maintenance helicopter come out from McMurdo before we'd be allowed to fly again. So we ended up stranded on the valley floor, but that gave us time to walk to a different field site and get some more Lamproferes. So it all worked out in the end. This was our second field site, Nussbaum Regal, and if you look at how you have some sort of solid colored rock over here, and those are granitoids, but on the right side you have stripier sort of brown and golden rocks, and those are metamorphic rocks. Those are from seafloor sediments that were metamorphosed as the mountain building episode was happening. And you can see that is just in the backdrop all over here. This area in a different one of the dry valleys has many more metamorphic rocks, but the same Lamproferes are still present cutting through them. This is the darkest it ever got in Antarctica, by the way, because the sun would get low enough to be behind this low hill that we were camping behind. The color got messed up a little bit here, but you can see there's this just our little lonely little tents here, and then we're in this Mars-like valley. You can see the moon there, and this little mountain known as the Matterhorn because it looks like the classic one. Another seal mummy. We saw some in the dry valleys in both the bright and the Taylor Valleys. This one has not fared as super well, but still fascinating. That is Mount Erebus. That is a shot I got of Mount Erebus from across the Ross Sea. And unfortunately, it's not the clearest, but this is the most focused one that I was able to get. And you can see that it's, no matter where I go, it's just kind of a land of rocks and ice. We did cross glaciers sometimes. There's actually a really cool example where you can see a glacier, it's flowing around the mountain and kind of stopping. So you have this little peninsula of rock in the middle of the glacier, which I think is sort of cool. And there's another one over here. Glaciers will sometimes do that. They'll be redirected in either direction around a mountain, and then they'll slow down because the force is sort of diluted by that. And you get another view of it here with a cute little glacial pond here. Another shot of Mount Erebus from a different angle on a slightly brighter day. This appeared to have been lake algae or seaweed suspended in ice, and I just took this one for a curiosity. But one of the very few signs of life I really saw, outside of the one skua I saw flying in the sky and the couple of times I saw lichen or moss when I was in the dry valleys. A nice view of the Transantarctic Mountains. Again, the Transantarctic Mountains were one of the rift shoulders when Antarctica started to split apart from the other continents, and you can kind of see that here, how they kind of just rise up. One cool thing, sometimes igneous rocks will, when they originate as magma, and the magma will sometimes break off the rock that it's traveling next to, the rock that is deep underground, and it will carry bits of that rock to the surface, and those bits of rock are known as xenoliths. And these are xenoliths that are of granulite. If you look closely, you can see that these are sort of warped and banded looking. The granulite rocks are metamorphic, and they were formed deep, deep, deep in the earth, and they were carried up by the Lamprophere dikes as they were traveling. So we have a couple examples of that, and it was cool to come across those, some more granulite xenoliths here. At one point, we went to a volcano and tried to look for eclogite, really deep metamorphic rock xenoliths in the volcanic rock, and didn't find any, unfortunately. More dikes with the Transantarctic Mountains looming in the background from a site known as Garwood. More dikes cutting across igneous rocks, me using my backpack for scale here to get a picture. A really nice example of just one of the dikes cutting through a hill here. And this is from a stop that was a little bit more into the interior, so you can see there's more glaciers. For one of the later stops, I was literally just walking along this ridge collecting samples, and you can actually see Mount Erebus in the distance, and that was more inland. This was our last stop at, let's see, it would have been, it wasn't Buddha Lake. I'm forgetting the very last lake. We stayed by we would stay by frozen lakes because we could lop the ice off of them and use that for water then. Back at McMurdo, I didn't get to see any orcas, but I saw this cool wire sculpture of an orca that they have on the way out of town. I got to see some leopard seals. I unfortunately don't have the best picture because I couldn't get very close to them, but they like hanging around near McMurdo because you get all the holes in the ice. And McMurdo starts to really look like a muddy mining camp in summer. You can see that's actually Scott's hut, and that's McMurdo itself. Those brown buildings are the dorms, and they were actually quite comfortable in general. They have nice heavy blinds to block out the sunlight. And that is a skua, I believe, nesting. Also not the best picture ever because I had to zoom in a bit. And another shot of McMurdo. And this is an old volcano that you can find some, it's related to Mount Erebus, even though it's not active anymore, but it's part of the Erebus hotspot. I have a few pictures that are scattered in here because I took some pictures with my phone and some with my camera, and the numbering is a little screwed up. But we've got my field mates collecting samples here and playing teeter-totter on a flat sample here. You can see Dr. John Cottle is about to jump. One of the seal mummies, the one I showed you in class, the better preserved of the two that I came across. Again, I was not supposed to touch these, not that I would want to, but we'll find out later when I talk about the Antarctic Treaty that there are the equivalent of national parks in Antarctica that are specially protected. A cool ventifact, or a feature carved by wind, that looks kind of like a person sticking its finger out. And another shot, actually, where you can see the Metamorphic Rocks. We're standing on top of that mountain that was made of the Metamorphic Rocks. And you can also see this thick black layer is from the Farrar basalts, from the rifting of Pangaea. And finally, this is Blood Falls. You can maybe barely see a red tinge here, but that is where Blood Falls is coming out. I could make it out when I was staring at it, so that was cool. More granulite xenoliths, a closer shot of the Matterhorn, and that is sculpted by glaciers. That's why it's shaped like that. friends in the dike landscape, more Matterhorn. Us helping each other put our rocks in our packs. Some cool, nice, a really well-formed high-grade metamorphic rock that I found in the area. Dikes cutting across both metamorphic rocks you can see here, and then in granites from the intrusion. My advisor hiding in a little cave vent effect from the wind, because the wind was quite intense. More Matterhorn, a little chain of command, although I guess my advisor shouldn't be it. My advisor should be in the front maybe and not having to put in anyone else's. But yes, this is my 3 field mates doing a little chain of like, let's put the rocks in each other's packs. They didn't do any back massaging. I joked that they should do that. Another shot of Lake Bonnie. That's actually what the lake where Blood Falls is popping out is. And more mountains. A shot that I got where you can see that same little peninsula in the ice from afar, and you can see them standing on more metamorphic rocks here. And again, it's kind of cool to see the glacier is flowing around this unit of rock that is especially resistant, so it's just not going over it. Some metamorphism here. Another cool ventifact that I've always thought looks like a skull, looks like a horse skull or a wolf skull or something like that. And that is my slideshow. So a very informal presentation, but hey, this is just here if you'd like to check out the pictures, and I'm always happy to answer questions. Good luck studying, and I will see you for the first lecture of new material on Monday, where we start talking about glaciers.